Welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, Editor-in-Chief of Carolina Journal, here with Deputy Editor Jeff Moore. And then, of course, we have CJ reporter who reports on all things education, David Bass, and from the John Locke Foundation, Mitch Kokai. All of our experts here. We've got a lot to talk about. One of the things we're really talking about is that the road to the White House is certainly running through North Carolina this time around for November's 2024 election. It looks like Governor Roy Cooper out of the Veep stakes for the Democratic Party, but certainly still on the campaign trail for Vice President Kamala Harris. This week he spoke to a Zoom of tens of thousands of people called White Dudes for Harris. And here's a clip of what he had to say. It's raising some real red flags for Republicans in North Carolina.
From Trump's sexual assaults to Vance's misogynistic comments, it's pretty clear that disrespect of women permeates Donald Trump land and MAGA Republicans.
One of the things we're seeing in this is it looks like he's saying that Trump Republicans are anti-women, are disrespectful of women. I mean, as a woman, that is alarming to me to hear our governor say something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, it seems like this is the kind of red meat politics. So he is out of the Veep stakes, but clearly still participating in the
this
campaign.
Thing raised hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and this is a narrative that you see as far as an attack line against the Trump administration, Trump as a candidate in particular. And the kind of sexist, misogynistic, they put that on him, bad with women, bad with suburban women as far as the voter profiles go. So it seems like with Kamala Harris being the presumptive nominee now, that they're opening up that can again to say that Donald Trump is against women.
Sure. What are your thoughts on this? Because I'm not hearing a lot of policy. It's more about, it's not that they disagree with his policies, they're trying to reframe her policies. They're making it about personalities.
They do have policy disagreements, of course, but they have a better angle, they think, in attacking the personality. I mean, that's largely how Joe Biden won was, hey, he's not Donald Trump, and he's the one who can beat Donald Trump. Now they want to say you don't want Donald Trump back. They're looking at Donald Trump's records. They're talking about the Stormy Daniels and his history with that, comments he's made, the fact that he will almost certainly continue to be kind of bashing Kamala Harris on the campaign trail. They'll use that. They'll use what J.D. Vance said, the comments about childless women and something about cat ladies, and they're going to throw that in there, and all of and talk about abortion and abortion policies and whether Republicans, whether they're in charge, would get rid of all abortions. So all of that's going to be in that stew of issues that Democrats are going to point to. They're not going to talk about the economy, and they're not going to talk about jobs, they're not going to talk about school choice or anything that actually
that we want to know about.
That would tend to drive people toward Republicans. They're going to talk about the things that are going to scare people about Trump and Republicans.
Sure. This is actually, of course, Trump not immune to this. He's never going to pull back when he has an opportunity. This is a clip of him speaking in Charlotte. Now, this was just 2 weeks after the assassination attempt, and he says, "Look, we've beaten Biden. It's time to go after Harris." This is what former President Donald Trump had to say.
For 3.5 years, Lion Kamala Harris has been the ultra-liberal driving force behind every single Biden catastrophe. She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country. If she ever gets the chance to get into office, we're not going to let that happen.
Certainly he's going to go straight after personality, too. Where do you think the policy is and all that? That's really what I want to know. What are you going to do in 2025?
Well, it's interesting, because in 2020, so Biden coming in and making it about Trump's personality, he was coming in as not the incumbent at that point. So this is a little bit different in that, Harris coming in and trying to make it about Trump's personality. She's coming in as the, de facto incumbent from the Biden administration. So they don't want to focus on the top two issues, which is, inflation, economy, and the border, because they don't poll well on those. So she's doing everything she can to make it about something else.
And of course, she was the border czar.
Right.
Yes, which all of a sudden now magically they're saying, no, that never happened. So, she's coming in and they're really trying to reintroduce her to America. Everybody knows what Trump is at this point. You probably made up your mind about that, but they're doing their best to kind of reintroduce her scrub some of the record, really make it a personality contest at this point. But yeah, the question is, what are her policy positions?
Right.
It's hard to know that on a lot of key issues. So.
It is. Do you think it's working? I mean, I'm watching these Zoom calls, hundreds of thousands of people on Zoom calls, for, white dudes for Harris, women for Harris, all these different identity groups. I think it's interesting they're really going after these identity groups to try and gen up support for her.
The big thing for me is an identity, it's not an identity group, but it is a huge voting bloc, is the working class voters, the same ones that in 2016, in those key Rust Belt states kind of swept Trump in. Joe Biden had a lot of appeal to those voters. I think he did really well in 2020 as part of that.
Sure.
How is Kamala Harris going to appeal or not appeal to those voters? Because I think a huge part of the election is going to hinge on that. There are these different segments. She might be able to gin up a lot of support in a voting bloc that was already probably going to go for her anyway.
Right.
But what about some of these real swing voters that in these districts, in these states? It's going to be decided very narrowly probably. So it really matters where they end up going in the working class.
Sure.
All of those calls that you were talking about are good for generating support and interest among people who are already going to vote Democratic.
Right.
So people who are likely to go to the polls anyway to cast that ballot. Does it do anything for the people who are in the middle on the fence? They're going to be the ones who decide this.
Sure.
And neither candidate really has done much yet to talk about the issues that interest them.
Very interesting. Now you've been on the other side of that podium with the GOP in past roles. Lara Trump, Whatley heading up. Do you think that they're focused on North Carolina is because they're interested in their home state, or do you really think North Carolina could make or break this? We haven't elected a Democrat president since 2008.
Yeah, so North Carolina as a swing state is kind of a misnomer if you're looking at the past, just a few cycles. We have since 2008 when Obama has swung. North Carolina swung for him. But I think the Chairman Whatley, chairman of the RNC, Lara Trump, co-chair there, have an obvious interest and relevance for North Carolina. But I think in reverse, actually, their relevance and value to the RNC was due to a lot of success that they had in North Carolina, a model for success, actually, to elect more Republicans on that side of things, just like the Democrats would like to elect more Republicans on their side of things. So I think they look at North Carolina as a valuable target, not necessarily as something that's quite under threat. With Kamala Harris entering the race, and Joe Biden leaving the race, it's kind of an unprecedented thing, and we've had so many unprecedented things that it's hard to react to all of them. But I think what we maybe see now with these Zoom calls, and you have the hundreds of thousands of people on there, and you have this blitz for the Harris campaign now, there seems to be a collective sigh of relief that they aren't having to back a guy that they all were lacking confidence in as far as his physical and mental capacity to actually do the job. So I think they're all just kind of breathing a sigh of relief that they have a candidate now that they're not totally embarrassed to actually support. And so I think you're going to see the enthusiasm pick up among people who were going to vote Democratic anyway. But now they're free to be publicly enthusiastic about a candidate, whereas before they may be a little bit embarrassed about supporting the guy that's clearly failing up on the debate stage.
Does this give her an advantage, though? Because she's coming in, she's going to ride that honeymoon period potentially all the way to November, where a candidate who actually went through a primary process has to survive and talk about policy and go the ups and downs of the entire race.
Yeah, she did not survive the presidential primary process before. She was out before even Iowa. Even though we are on the final stretch, I think it is still, we tend to make some opinions in August that feel like this is how it's going to be right before the election day. And that, historically, for me personally, just an anecdote, is I'm always mistaken. I always think, this is the narrative set for the election. It's a long time until election day. So I think that this is going to wear off. Some of the policy will pick back up into the mix because they're going to have something, have to have something to actually talk about and go back against each other, especially if they agree to a debate. There's going to be a lot of mudslinging, obviously, but there'll probably be some policy positions that pop through too. Interestingly, once she makes a VP pick, the Republicans' VP pick, I think they pride themselves on having a pick that is able to debate, and he's a good talker. And so whoever the Harris campaign picks for VP, they may be looking to set up that kind of dichotomy as well.
Right, very interesting. Okay, now looking ahead to November, the battle over third parties, all that drama spilling into North Carolina courtrooms. Bring us up to date on what's happening with third parties going into November.
Well, of course, in the last presidential election, Donald Trump won the electoral votes, but it was pretty close.
Sure.
It was not that much more than a percentage point that he beat Joe Biden. So having third parties on the ballot could end up making a difference if it's another close race. We know that we're going to have the Constitution Party on the ballot. We already have Greens and Libertarians. They're kind of baked into the mix. Now we're going to have the Constitution Party, which tends to be of interest to folks on the conservative side of the fence. And then there were two other parties that were of interest. One, We the People, which is tied to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The other one, Justice for All, which is tied to Cornel West. The Kennedy Party probably would take more votes from Democrats, but could take some from Trump because he's kind of an outsider, has some different views, whereas the Justice for All party would basically take votes from the left.
Okay.
Folks who are going to vote for Justice for All, there aren't any of them, or at least not many, who would vote for a Republican. So the Democrats see that as a threat. Right now, where things stand, We the People, RFK Jr. party, is on the ballot. Justice for All, the Cornel West party, not on the ballot. There are two different lawsuits that are challenging both of those decisions. The Democratic Party is challenging the decision to put We the People on the ballot, whereas people who are supporting Justice for All want to get that party on the ballot. They're both in court trying to reverse the decision from the State Board of Elections. There was a hearing in the Justice for All case, and a ruling will come out soon about whether they'll get on the ballot. Meanwhile, there's a hearing now scheduled for August 12th on the Democrats' efforts to get We the People off the ballot, the RFK Jr. party. So all of this kind of needs to be resolved by mid to late August, because that's the time when you need to start getting all of the information in for the ballots, to get those ballots out for the early mailings.
Sure. David, what do you think about, we have a big unaffiliated voting bloc in North Carolina. How important is the third party?
Well, I mean, to Mitch's point, that in 2020, the state was decided by about, around 75,000 votes. You talk about in a state of over 10 million people.
Sure.
Obviously, not everyone's voting, but that's still a very, very thin margin. So some of these third parties could really make a difference, make or break for, either candidate along the margins. And nationally, North Carolina is in that, handful of states that could potentially be competitive. There is a pathway to victory without it, but North Carolina definitely helps.
Sure.
And we could tell it's important by who is fighting this. I mean, if you thought that it was great for people to have all the voting options, you wouldn't fight any of these third parties. But the state Democratic Party is involved in trying to keep the RFK Jr. party off the ballot. There's a group called Clear Choice Action that's tied to that Democratic operative, Mark Elias.
Right.
They've been involved in trying to keep both the Kennedy Party and the West Party off the ballot. So whatever we think about it, the Democratic Party certainly doesn't want these parties on the ballot and doesn't want them eating into any of the votes they might otherwise get.
Sure, absolutely. What could this mean for down ballot candidates?
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially with the flip of candidates on the Democratic side. The question about how much of the vote would the third party candidate pull and from which side. Now you switch the candidate on the Democratic side and it changes the calculus all over again for where that may end up. I think it actually is helpful down ballot if you have more parties on the ballot, especially when you have the ability for people to run in local races as a Constitution Party candidate or a Green Party or what have you. That it will just up the interest in making sure that that person gets on the local council, and the Constitution Party and other ones like it. They're going to go after the low-hanging fruit at first. They're going to get candidates for county commissions and school boards and things like that, where they can get into positions. But I think it, in general, raises the engagement level of a local voting electorate, and so it's a positive thing going into the election to have all the talk about third parties and the battles about keeping them on and off the ballot, but overall I think it's just good for the voting base to have an interest in it.
More showing up, yeah, of course. So one of the stories you've covered this week, families down at the state capitol demanding some action and some answers on what happened with the state budget and the Opportunity Scholarship Program. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, so the other day there was a parent rally down on Halifax Mall behind the legislative building. These were parents who were a small representation of the around 55,000 students who are on the wait list right now for the Opportunity Scholarship. So last year the General Assembly had passed an expansion of the voucher program that basically was billed as being universal school choice.
Right.
It was really universal eligibility, so anyone could apply for it regardless of income, any family. But what ended up happening was there was so much overwhelming applications for it, around 72,000 total applications coming in, that there just wasn't enough funding to actually fill the entire list. So in the short session, the General Assembly was considering funding the list. They couldn't come to an agreement on the House side. They wanted to tie some extra funding for traditional public schools in with the mix. So between the House and Senate, they couldn't come to an agreement. But I think the point that the parents were making who came out was what got lost in all this is these families that are now left very much in limbo, not knowing if they'll have the scholarship or not. So a lot of families are having to, either make different decisions about schooling or pull from, savings or college savings accounts. I think I heard one of those situations. So there's increasing uncertainty with it. The General Assembly is going to be back a few more times this year, so there's still a possibility of having it worked out. I think the families were there just to give voice, though, to what they're experiencing with this.
Sure. So one of the arguments I hear about this a lot is that this is school vouchers pulling from public school budgets. Does the Opportunity Scholarship pull from the pot of money that's supposed to go to traditional public schools?
So the idea with a voucher or with school choice in general is that the money should be following the child and not going to the institution itself. So in this case, the funding is tied to the per pupil allotment to the public school for each student, which would then go follow that student wherever the student is going. So I think that's the general idea behind it. Yeah.
Very interesting. What are your thoughts?
Here's the problem with that argument, Donna, is that basically what the people are saying who are making this argument is that this is money that should be going to the public schools that's going to these private school opportunity scholarships. They ignore the fact that the traditional public school budget is going up anyway.
Right.
And they are saying, well, all of that money that you are putting in opportunity scholarships, you should throw that at the traditional public schools as well. The General Assembly said, no, we're going to give the public schools an increase, as we have every year, including teacher pay raises. But we're also going to set aside this additional money to give parents an option, because they should have the choice. It's parents' responsibility, not government's responsibility, to make sure that the kids get the best education for them. The other thing that I found interesting was Tim Moore, the House Speaker's comment that, well, they'll probably go back later and retroactively add this funding. And I thought, well, I mean, that's not going to help the parents who now have had to decide whether they're going to be able to afford to send kids to school starting within the next few weeks.
Oh, a lot of schools are starting next week.
Yeah, I mean, if it's retroactive, maybe that's helpful for the ones who were able to afford it and can now say, okay, well, now I got a little bit of a breather from what I did to have to pay for this. But there are going to be a lot of parents who just say, I'm not sure they're going to do this. I can't. We've got to pick another option.
So it goes after that. That really hurts the families who couldn't afford it in the first place, which is what this was designed for.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that is hard. You have kids in school. Already started.
Yeah, my kids started in school a year-round schedule, so they started a couple weeks ago. So if you were waiting on an opportunity scholarship to see if they're going to actually fill this gap and make you whole, to see if you would be able to do that, and you were on a year-round schedule, you would be 2 weeks into school and at least one tuition payment in, and then thinking you're going to have to pull your child out of school or make it work. And there's a lot of incentive to make things like that work for your kids.
Yeah, of course.
But it's very interesting to hear the retroactive, because it doesn't really quite work like that unless you can actually afford it, and then it helps to make you whole down the line. But pitching this as universal school choice during that session, having supermajorities, having a surplus, and having months of negotiations with no actual solution to this very simple problem is disappointing.
Right. Where do you think we go from here?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
It depends. I mean, there was no budget adjustments passed either. They couldn't come to an agreement on that. So there's still an opening, I think, for it. I don't know what the catalyst would be at this point, because really, to the point that the guys were making, is it would have been helpful for the families to know in January, February, March, what was actually going to happen, because there are deadlines and all that sort of thing. So we are very much last hour here. So it depends. It remains to be seen what will happen. We do know for the next school year, the ratchet up of funding is there. It's just this school year that the disappointing actions of
yeah, of
not
course.
happening.
All right, we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Okay, one of the other things we've been talking a lot about over the last couple of years is the states, particularly at the executive level, push to move to green energy and carbon neutrality. There's an update on this. It turns out that that race for carbon neutrality is really going to dig into your wallet. Jeff, what's the latest on that?
Yeah, so we've had some meetings at the Utility Commission. Obviously, Duke Energy, the biggest utility, kind of a monopoly utility set up in North Carolina, they go to the Utilities Commission to ask permission to raise rates and stuff like that. But also, when we passed House Bill 951 a couple of years ago, it had a carbon reduction, emission reductions goals, aspirations, I think is what it's kind of listed as. They're not as exactly mandates, but emissions reductions and carbon neutrality by certain dates. Duke has come back and said, we might need to push back some of those emission states. There's an internal target of a 70% emissions reduction by 2030. That was in the original carbon plan. Duke,
5 years.
And so Duke says we are not going to hit that. And the reason is interesting is because we have so much growth in this state that they had to revise their demand forecast for energy in North Carolina and what it was going to take to actually meet that demand. And when they looked at all of those bits of information, they thought there's no way we're going to be able to meet this demand and also meet the emissions reduction goals because we need some core generating power. So they're looking at adding, I think, almost 9 gigawatts of capacity of natural gas overall, and having natural gas be a larger mix of the portfolio than some of the alternatives. So solar, in raw numbers, they'd add some solar in this new generation mix, but it would be much more gas, and the percentage of solar would actually go down.
So solar becoming like window dressing?
Yeah, a little bit, but also just to do those things, they're expensive and they're not super efficient at producing affordable, reliable energy. So every time you're adding those solar fields, you're having to add capacity for some reliable generation, so nat gas and most of the time. So it's not just one solar operation that adds the extra energy. You have to build redundancies into the system, and these things cost money. So when they look at some of the rates that they would have to charge to actually recoup some of the capital expenditures and all of this new technology, it looks like that some industrial customers have extrapolated that their power bills will go up 2 to 3 times. And so we've got industry groups that actually are interveners in this case. They testified. They offered written expert testimony to say that the plans that Duke is releasing to kind of change their carbon plan, we understand they need to do it to kind of back off these emissions goals, but it is going to drown us in higher costs. So if you have steel manufacturers, plastic manufacturers, a factory, and they're paying 2 to 3 times more in energy than what they're currently paying, that's going to factor into everything that we buy in North Carolina, to the economic growth story in the state, to the attractiveness of other corporations and businesses that would like to develop here. So the headline is a request to push back that date for the emissions. But if you look under the hood, there's actually a lot of people saying, yeah, even if they push that back, and even if we have the more nat gas, the whole setup we have with this emissions reduction, the carbon neutrality mandate or aspiration, is actually going to drown us in higher costs. And it's going to really kneecap the state going forward as far as economic development and just the quality of life that we have here. Low electricity costs and reliable electricity generation is one of the main attractions of North Carolina. And now it seems, at least some of these interveners seem to think that we're actually entering the path, kind of the Californication path of energy policy, and that's not an area that we want to go. A couple years ago, we had brownouts during Christmas. Some of the experts that testified said that this is a path toward more and more of those rolling blackouts and brownouts. So we'd be better off investing in those more reliable energy sources.
Sure. That is alarming. What would that do for our economic development? We keep hearing every day factories are opening and coming and building, and what if they can't get the lights on?
Yeah, bad news if that factor grows in terms of the energy cost. To me, that would be a self-inflicted wound, because all of this is being done just to chase some goal that really doesn't have any impact. I mean, we've talked at the John Locke Foundation for years about the fact that North Carolina could fall off the edge of the continent and it would have no measurable impact on global temperatures, which is why all of this is being done. And so to fight for the reduced carbon emissions and to say you're going to have everything reduced by this by 2030 and we're going to have all these electric vehicles instead of fossil fuel vehicles, I mean, it's all designed to meet a goal that wouldn't actually produce any tangible benefit. And in the meantime, you're kneecapping your economy by saying, okay, we're going to double or triple these energy costs for all these businesses. We won't be number one or number two in those business rankings if that comes to pass.
Right, right. Well, I mean, we've got this march toward lower and lower corporate taxes, lower and lower income tax, and it really could hurt people, North Carolina being an attractive state to set up shop.
Yeah, I mean, the taxes are an important factor, but also the bills that you're going to have to pay to run your business, that's another factor. And if the energy costs double or triple for no good reason, just to meet a political goal rather than to actually meet something that is environmentally important, then that just sounds like a bad recipe all the way around.
Absolutely. What's the next step? Yeah.
It's more than just the cost, too. That is a big part of it, but the reliability part, testimony from one of the experts was describing a factory instance where they had an interruption in power that was measured in microseconds.
Oh, wow.
So it was a little bit of a blip, but it messed up one of their factory lines, and it spoiled like $20,000 worth of material because the interruption in power messed up this machine, and it wasted a whole lot of material. They had to shut everything down. It was like 0.24 microseconds or something that they listed that created tens of thousands of dollars of damage. The reliability of energy sources in North Carolina for industrial and commercial customers is absolutely critical. And if they have little disruptions, and when you have solar and wind, we saw it happen in Texas a couple of years ago when they had these huge mix-ups because of the intermittency of some of the sources and putting it all on the grid, it can create a lot of problems that are unanticipated when we're thinking of arbitrary emissions reduction goals.
So what's the process from here? The Utilities Commission, are they going to issue a report? What are they going to?
Yeah, so they are, Duke is going to the Utilities Commission to say we'd like to adjust that, but they have a review of the carbon plan and the integrated resource plan, which is basically their mix of different energy generating sources out there, their nuclear plants, nat gas plants, and solar fields, and what have you. Every 2 years they do a full review of it. So this was the interim kind of look. They're requesting some adjustments to push back some of these internal dates. They think that they're well on their way to carbon neutrality by 2050. They might ask for an extension there in 2045 based on how things have gone so far. But they're going to have more meetings, and it will be next year that they would come and actually functionally change anything about a carbon plan.
All right, very interesting. I appreciate y'all being here. Thank you for joining us on the Debrief. We'll have more information in a brand new Carolina Journal poll next week. Thanks so much.